Hola, Piloncillos. Welcome back to the Offerings of Copal podcast. This is your host, Cihua Mazatl. This is now episode 9. Thank you all for being with me today. I know that I missed the last 2 weeks. I'm speaking to you from a place of deep reflection, fresh from what has been an intense artistic time crunch. As some of you may know, I've recently participated in multiple community art events, including Dia de los Muertos Mictlan themed art show and the 6th annual Chicana art show, from which I collaborated and created this very elaborate art installation. These moments of creating under pressure always leave me in awe of the power that art holds, not just as a personal endeavor, but as something far more profound, an inheritance, a gift passed down through our ancestral lines. This episode is for everyone with a creative spirit, regardless of how you identify. Human beings, by right of being a human being, you are an artist. And before you run off and you say, I'm not an artist, I believe that this episode is really important. But before we begin, I want to acknowledge the terms I'll be using throughout the episode. I often use terms like, I'll say, quote unquote, Latino, Mexican American, or Chicana, Chicanx to describe our experiences for continuity and clarity. But I want to recognize that our identities are diverse and complex. My words are meant to be inclusive of all who identify as Indigenous, Mexican, Latin American, and to those who connect with these experiences. This episode is for everyone, like I said, with a creative spirit. But yeah, with that being said, let's get into this. Being surrounded by so much art in this last 3 weeks and really the last several years of my life, or debatedly my entire life, with the art that I have witnessed, with the beautiful creativity that has inspired me to walk this path, it's really left an indelible mark on me. In Mexico City, I've stood in awe of the ancient templos of Teotihuacan, of Tenochtitlan. I've felt the artistry in every stone, in every carving that has withstood time. To see the mascaritas in the museums, all the elaborate stonework, the statues, just everything. In Oaxaca, I've seen the vibrant textiles woven by Zapotec artisans, each thread a story, each pattern a connection to the land. And the códices, those intricate manuscripts that tell the stories of our ancestors, are masterpieces of creativity and resilience. These experiences remind me that art is woven into every aspect of our lives. It is the essence of who we are. Without art, we wouldn't have stories, we wouldn't have language, we wouldn't have writing. Art is one of the most vital gifts we've inherited from our ancestors, especially as people of the Anáhuac, but also as people of the world. It is interwoven into every part of life. It's in our architecture, our textiles, our pottery, our dances, and even our food. In pre-Hispanic times, art was never separate from daily existence. The Mexica and other indigenous tribes used the land itself to create, using natural dyes from the cochinilla, fibers from the maguey for clothing, and clay from the earth to shape their stories into vessels and effigies. Art has always evolved with the land and with what was available to us, the tools, the colors, and inspiration. I remember visiting the Museo de Arte Popular in Mexico City and highly recommend that you go. It featured like folk art from all regions of Mexico. And one of the things that they highlighted was how the art of each region was highly dependent on the land, and what was available there, and the flora and the fauna. And a lot of it was sort of offerings and like odes to the art and the land. And it was really interesting also to see the relationship between the new materials that were brought post-colonialism, post-invasion, and how it had an impact on the on the art, or how they continue to use their ancient forms of art making, but now with these different materials, and sort of how it has evolved and really given birth to what we know these culturas today. It's a constant exchange, a relationship with the natural world that continues to influence our culture today. Art was and continues to be a central point of trade and cultural preservation for our people. Ceremonial masks, intricately woven garments, and symbolic carvings were once traded across communities, each item carrying stories, identities, and energies. Even today, our artisan markets are spaces of exchange, not only of objects, but of cultura, knowledge, and connection. And back then, the currency was art. It was, I'll exchange my olla for your, you know, Salvador, whatever it may be. That was the exchange, and continues, but now we have a different medium. Despite this incredible legacy, the reality for many quote unquote Latino or Mexican Chicanx creatives today is stark. Statistics show that the representation of Latinos in the art industry is disproportionately low. According to a report by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, only about 8% of individuals in the creative industries identify as quote-unquote Hispanic or quote-unquote Latino, even though we make up roughly 19% of the U.S. population. The majority of us are blue-collar or in service work, often unable to make art our full-time livelihood because of systemic barriers and financial necessity. Our art is seen, consumed, and commodified, but the people behind it are often ignored or undervalued. And I want to bring this home for you. Take a moment to think back, especially to the pandemic, to 2020, when so many of us were stuck at home. It was really interesting to see when people weren't at work, what people decided to do was make art. So many people got in touch with creative pursuits, and creative pursuits is so much broader than just a paintbrush. It is gardening, it is interior design, it is cooking, it is 1,000 different things, but it's creativity. This brings me to a point that I think is vital. How other cultures often engage with Mexican art and culture purely for consumption. There is a transactionality to it, where our traditions are often reduced to something that can be bought or appropriated without acknowledgement of the depth, the labor, and the love that goes into every creation. As artists, we must advocate for an equal exchange of energy. We are not simply commodities. We deserve the same respect, the same value, and the same opportunities as any other artist. And I want you to think about the local restaurants, or, the places that are popping up that take advantage of that certain aesthetic or appropriate that certain aesthetic. And, they want to eat our food. They want what we have to offer, but yet they don't want us, right? There is also a persistent distinction made between highbrow and lowbrow art, where so much of our work is considered lowbrow, folk art, or simply decorative. But anyone who has witnessed the elaborate work of traditional danza costumes, the meticulous beadwork of the wixárika, or the detailed murals found in our neighborhoods knows that these pieces are anything but simple. They are deeply intricate. They tell stories. They preserve memories. The categorization of our work as lowbrow is an extension of colonial thinking, a means to devalue and diminish our contributions to the art world. This dismissal is part of what I call the art wound. Many of us carry this wound from childhood. Maybe we were told that art wasn't valuable, that it wasn't a viable career choice, that it was a waste of time, especially coming from immigrant backgrounds. When you look at the richness of Mexican culture, it's almost like looking in a mirror every day and not realizing the beauty that stares back at you. We have this incredible abundance of creativity, but we've been conditioned to devalue it, to see it as less than. as something that doesn't contribute to survival when it, in fact, is the very essence of our humanity. The art wound also comes from what I call a colonial wound. It is the result of attempts at erasing our creative identity and commodifying our culture. Colonization not only sought to take our land and resources, but also strip us of our creative expression, to relegate it to something that could be bought, sold, or forgotten. This wound is deep, and it impacts how we see our creativity today. Healing from this wound means reclaiming our artistry as an essential part of who we are, something that cannot be erased or commodified. The theme of this podcast, Offerings of Copal, is a powerful metaphor here. The poposhkomil represents the sacred fire, the essence of our spirit and soul, and an extension of that very first fire from which all things expanded. It represents our creative life force. When I light this amador, I connect with that inner creative fire, and my prayers come from that place. I hope to kindle that fire for you as well, with my words and my stories. Healing the art wound begins with addressing the inner critic. We need to look closely at these moments where we felt our creative fire go out, where it was stifled, where it was snuffed out by others or by ourselves. That is the creative wound, a deep cut that often leaves us feeling that our art doesn't matter or that it's not worth pursuing. I want to remind each of you that while feedback and critique have their place in art, what matters most is that you are expressing yourself from that deep inner place. Art is made for you first, and everything else comes second. Your creativity has a right to exist just as you do. Denying yourself that inherent creativity is almost synonymous with denying yourself. Let me say that again for you. Denying yourself that inherent creativity is almost synonymous with denying yourself. Art helps us channel and express the deepest parts of ourselves. It allows those parts to live and exist in the world. By giving our creativity space, we allow our truest selves to be seen and acknowledged. Here are some reflection questions to help you start healing the art wound and to identify it, especially if you believe that you're not an artist or that you're not creative. Number 1, can you remember a time when you were told that your art was invaluable or important? How did that make you feel? And how has it affected your relationship with creativity? For a lot of you, this time is going to be back in elementary school or maybe more recent. Number 2, what does your inner critic say when you think about creating? Whose voice does that sound like? And how can you start to quiet it? Number 3, when was the last time you allowed yourself to create just for the joy of it, without any expectations? How did it feel? Number 4, what would it look like to make space for your creativity today, even if it's just for a few minutes? And 5, how can you reconnect with that inner sacred fire, the creative life force within you? What inspires you? And how can you bring more of that inspiration into your daily life? I want to empower you to pick up that brush, that pen, that piece of clay, cooking pan, or whatever medium calls to you, and to create without fear. To create because it brings you joy, because it connects you to your ancestors, because it gives your soul a voice. The sacred fire is within you. For some of you, healing this art wound is the very first step on your creative journey, beginning to nurture that spark, to explore your creativity without judgment. But for others, especially those who have been creating for years, the challenges are different. It's not only about finding your creative voice, but about making a living from it. It's about transitioning from being a part-time artist to a full-time one and navigating the realities of what that means. Being a full-time artist is not without its challenges. It means at times being a solopreneur, handling not only the creation of art, but the marketing, the sales, the logistics. There are days when the work feels endless and the sacrifices heavy. I grew up surrounded by my mother's creativity. She was and is an incredible artist in her own right, but survival often meant she had to put her art aside to do other work, to provide for us. Watching her make that sacrifice was both a lesson in resilience and a source of pain, knowing what she was capable of and what the world was missing out on because she had to prioritize survival. Now, in her later years, her hands are trying to heal from years of manual labor. It's not that I don't want to be like her or end up like her. She is noble in her work. May I be so lucky. But I want to learn from her and make her sacrifices worthy by living a life she would be proud of, not just for her, but for me. The word sacrifice often conjures images of struggle, hardship, and pain. And while it's true that being an artist requires dedication, I want to reframe this idea of sacrifice as something more akin to a ceremonial offering. It is not lost upon me that today is a day of Mazatl. We are on Cihua Mazatl today, and the themes of sacrifice are always so inherent in the symbolism of the deer. But when we create, we are giving something of ourselves to the world, our time, our energy, our spirit. This is not just blood, sweat, and tears. It's a sacred exchange. It's about consciously choosing to give a part of ourselves to our craft, just as our ancestors did when they made offerings to honor the sacred fire. It's an act of devotion. What if we imagined a world where creating art didn't have to be about suffering, but rather about honoring our gifts in a ceremonial way, where the sacrifices we make are like offerings that nurture our spirits and connect us to something greater? This is the vision I hold on to, a world where the creative path is recognized as sacred, where artists are supported in their journey, not just by their communities, but by the structures that surround them. I didn't have access to traditional art materials growing up, and in many ways, I feel like I've spent years trying to catch up to my peers. I've had to dedicate time to other art forms, to other creative pursuits that were more financially viable just to keep going. While I don't like to limit my creativity, I can't ignore the fact that my experience as a Chicana artist comes with its own sets of challenges. Opportunities that might be available to others are often out of reach for those of us without the right connections or the right background. And on top of all of this, there's the added challenge of facing criticism from within our own community. There are those who might bring you down or call you a sellout for trying to make a creative living. It comes from this place of, I'm sacrificing my desires to work and survive. Why do you get to have all the fun and get paid? The reality is, many people don't see the hard work that goes into being an artist. Yes, it might look like fun, playing with colors, creating beauty, but there's a craftsmanship, a dedication, a finesse behind it. It's not effortless. People often say, oh, it's just talent. But what they don't realize is that it's actually years upon years of practice, perseverance, and constant growth. Art isn't something that just happens. It's something that's cultivated with intention and sacred sacrifice. But with that said, I believe we also have a personal responsibility to honor our creativity with intention and devotion, just as our ancestors made offerings to the sacred fire. We must make our own offerings in the form of time, effort, and dedication to hold ourselves to a certain standard, to set time aside to educate ourselves, to do the research, to learn new skills, and to apply them to our craft. This isn't a complaint or a criticism. It's a truth, a lived experience. And it's one that, when acknowledged, can lead us to a place of empowerment. Despite the challenges, despite the sacrifices, pursuing our creative dreams is important. It's necessary, not just for ourselves, but for our communities and for the continuation of our cultural legacy. In honoring our personal responsibility, we must remember that our creativity is part of something much larger. It is in the continuation of a sacred tradition that has survived against all odds. Every time we create, we honor those who came before us, those who were silenced, and those who fought to keep the fire burning. We must be willing to tend to that fire, to feed it with our offerings, and to ensure that it continues to burn brightly for future generations. I want to speak directly to those of you listening who may not see yourselves as artists. You may think, I'm not creative, or art isn't for me, but I want to challenge that belief. We all have an inner artist, a part of us that yearns to create, to express, to make something meaningful. Whether it's cooking, gardening, storytelling, or even how you dress, creativity manifests in countless ways. It's not about quote unquote being good at art. It's about connecting with that sacred fire within you and letting it guide you. We are all creative beings by right of being a human being. We just need to give ourselves permission to explore that side of ourselves. So, how do we engage in a personal creative practice and find value in it? How do we honor our ancestors and our own inner artist? For those of us who want to make a living from our art, how do we find that fair exchange for our work? An exchange that honors our heritage and acknowledges the value of what we create. These are not easy questions, and I don't have all the answers, but I think part of it lies in how we value ourselves and our work, how we negotiate that space between folk art and fine art, between cultural tradition and personal expression, between creating for survival and creating for joy. To empower our creative practice, we must approach it with reverence. Creating is not just about making something beautiful. It's about tapping into that sacred life force, the sacred fire within us. It's about recognizing that our creativity is both a right and a responsibility. We are the keepers of a legacy that deserves to be honored, and we must do so by being intentional in our practice, by taking time to grow, and by allowing ourselves to explore without fear. It's hard to bring some forms of folk art into the spotlight without appropriating them, and it's challenging to individuate while still honoring the collective, but I believe it's possible. And I think it's necessary for us as artists to engage with these questions, to explore our creative practice, to value it, and to help others see the value in it as well. By doing so, we not only heal our own art wound, but also create a path for others to do the same, ensuring that our cultural and creative inheritance is not only preserved, but also celebrated. Before we close, I want to revisit the idea of art as a sacred exchange. This is something I feel is crucial, not just for artists, but for everyone listening, because we all have something to offer the world, whether it's through painting, dancing, cooking, or the way you nurture relationships. Creativity manifests in so many forms. It's about taking what you have within you and sharing it, allowing it to breathe and take shape, no matter how big or small. Sometimes we hesitate to create because we fear it won't be good enough. But good enough for whom? Remember, your creativity is first and foremost for you. It's an offering to yourself, an opportunity to express what words alone cannot. And through that expression, you contribute to the broader story of your community and your lineage. So when you hesitate, I encourage you to ask yourself, what would my ancestors think? How would they feel seeing me honor their memory through this creative act, however humble it may be? For you are an extension of that line. And when you create for yourself from that place of honesty, those who will connect with it will arrive whenever they arrive. But remember, your art isn't about that. Those connections happen naturally. Art is not just about beauty or skill. It's about connection. It's about remembering that we come from a lineage of creators who found ways to express themselves despite adversity. Every mark, every song, every dance, every woven thread is a testament to resilience and spirit. When we engage in our own creative practice, we are participating in that same spirit, carrying forward the sacred fire of our ancestors, especially now, more than ever. We have to get our voices out there. There have been attempts, and there will continue to be attempts to silence us, our voices, and the importance of what we have to say, share, and honor. This is the time to do the work. I also want to touch briefly on the importance of building supportive communities around our creativity. Too often, we experience creativity in isolation, thinking that our struggles are ours alone to bear. But there is power in sharing our journeys, both the triumphs and the challenges. Find those people who understand your creative fire, who can help you kindle it when it feels like it's going out. And if you can't find them, create that space. Be that person who uplifts others, who creates opportunities for collective growth, who shares the light and the warmth of that fire. In our shared experiences, we can find strength, healing, and inspiration. For those who are facing the challenges of making a living through art, I want to say this. Your work is needed. Your stories, your perspective, your voice, they all matter. It's not always easy, and the systems we live in don't always support creativity as they should. But every time you make the decision to create, despite the obstacles, you're planting seeds of change. You are contributing to a future where art in all its forms is valued and celebrated. It's worth it, and it's needed. So today, I leave you with this. Honor your creative impulses. Whatever it is that calls to you, give it space. Whether it's drawing, writing, building, or even simply imagining, it all counts. Feed that sacred fire within you and know that you are not alone in this journey. We are all walking together, each with our own offerings of Copal, each with our own creative spirit to share. Kamati for being here with me today. This conversation has left me feeling a little tender unexpectedly, but I just feel so blessed and honored and just humbled by the love and support, that y'all throw my way as I share this journey here with you, and even sharing some of these more vulnerable parts of the difficulty. And this isn't like a woe is me, but just sharing that this journey is one of devotion. But I just feel so blessed and lucky that I get to do this, that I get to show up, that I choose this, and I'll continue to choose this path. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need that spark of inspiration. And please, please let me know your thoughts, your reflections, or even your own experiences with healing that creative wound. I'd love to hear from you and to keep this conversation alive and going. If any of you want to support my work, you can acquire my book, Latoli Oracle, Divinations for Night and Day. It is an oracle book. So it's like oracle cards, but in book form. If you like the wisdom that I share, you may connect with my oracle. It gives you messages whenever you need them. I have signed copies and paperback versions on my website, which I'll have linked in the description of all of these. Or if you want to check out the jewelry I make or my art prints, and I also have some apparel available as well. Or if you would like to book a tonalamat reading, those are another labor of love that I just absolutely love sharing with you. And I would love to read your tonalamat, but you can book that on my website. So thank you. Until next time, keep that creative fire burning. And remember, you are a part of this rich, abundant, beautiful lineage of artists, healers, and storytellers. Let's honor that gift together. Tlaxcamati, Ometeot,